My name is Vorkal, and I want to make one thing absolutely clear before I begin this account. I did not sign up for any of this. I am a Threxian. We are by most galactic standards considered a moderately intelligent species. We have 4 arms, 2 sets of eyes that can rotate independently, and a life expectancy of about 300 standard cycles. We also have, and this is relevant, a very carefully developed sense of self-preservation that screams at us when danger is nearby. That instinct, the one that has kept my species alive for tens of thousands of years, started screaming the moment I walked into Orientation Hall 7 on the campus of the Galactic Academy of Sciences and saw the humans sitting in the back row. Let me be clear about something. I had read the files. Every student at the Academy receives a species briefing packet before the first day. It is 32 pages long and covers the basics: what each species eats, what offends them, how to avoid accidentally starting an interspecies incident before lunch. The human section was notable. It described them as a Class 3 biological anomaly, a species that somehow evolved at the top of a genuinely dangerous food chain despite being, by all physical measurements, completely unimpressive. No natural armor, no venom, no echolocation, no thermal sensing, no regenerative capability. They breathe oxygen and bleed when you cut them and sleep for roughly 1/3 of their entire lives. And somehow, they became the apex predator of an entire planet. The file said, "Proceed with respectful caution." I, Vorkal, made the mistake of reading that as a polite suggestion rather than a direct command from someone who had clearly met a human before. Her name was Petra Voss. She was sitting at the very back of the hall with her legs stretched out on the seat in front of her, reading a physical paper book, which was already strange because nobody uses physical paper books anymore, and eating something wrapped in foil that smelled like it had been through several stages of fire. She had dark red hair pulled up in a messy arrangement that looked accidental but, I would later learn, was actually extremely deliberate. She had pale skin with a scattering of dark spots across her nose, which I later learned humans call freckles, and which serve absolutely no biological purpose anyone has been able to identify. She looked, in the bluntest possible terms, unremarkable, which was exactly the problem. The first session of Advanced Xenobiology was run by Professor Guz Hartan, a Volundrian with 6 legs and a tenure record so long it predates the current galactic treaty. He is not what you would call warm. He walked in, set his datapad on the desk with a sound like a small controlled explosion, looked out at the room of 47 students representing 19 different species and said, "Half of you will not finish this course. The other half will wish they had not." Thrilling. Very welcoming. Wonderful place to spend the next 3 academic cycles. He began with the standard opening exercise, the one designed to establish a classroom hierarchy. Every professor does it slightly differently. Guz Hartan did it by asking each student to name the most dangerous biological specimen they had personally encountered and describe how they survived the encounter. This is, theoretically, an icebreaker. In practice, it is a dominance display. The first student, a Bruvian named Torvash Glain, talked about surviving a pack of Delian sand crawlers on a field expedition. The crawlers were apparently 6 meters long and had acid for saliva. Reasonable. Everyone nodded. The second student, a Malurian named Kessa Prin, described an encounter with a magnetic pulse predator on her home world that could stop hearts from 40 meters away. Also reasonable. The room was appropriately impressed. By the time it got to me, I described a nest of thornback beetles I had accidentally sat on during a camping trip. In retrospect, this was not my finest moment, but I was flustered because I kept glancing at the human in the back row, who had not looked up from her book once. Several students laughed. Not cruelly, just, honestly. Thornback beetles are about the size of a closed fist. They sting. They are unpleasant. They are not, by any objective measurement, the most dangerous thing I have ever encountered. And then it was Petra Voss's turn. Professor Guz Hartan looked at her for a long moment. She still had the book in her hands. She had not put it away. She had not even looked up until he said her name a second time. Voss, Petra Voss, human. She finally looked up. She did not look startled. She looked like someone who had been waiting and was mildly annoyed the waiting had lasted this long. "Yeah," she said. "Just that. Yeah. Not yes. Not here. Not present. Yeah. Your contribution to the exercise," Professor Hartan said with the tone of someone who has been doing this for a very long time and has encountered exactly this kind of student before and has never once found it charming. Petra Voss closed her book. She thought for a moment, and then she said, "Brown bear. Appalachian wilderness. Northern sector of the American continent on Earth. I was 19. Alone. No weapons. The room went very quiet. And," Professor Hartan said, "and I made myself look big and yelled at it until it left," she said. "More quiet. That is your contribution, Hartan said flatly. I mean, she said, it worked. Someone in the front row, a Volundrian student named Osik Prale, who had previously described fighting off a pack of cave predators on his homeworld using only a metal rod and his secondary arms, leaned over to me and whispered, "Is she joking?" I did not know. I genuinely did not know. What I did know, because I had done my reading, was that an Appalachian brown bear on Earth weighs between 200 and 400 standard kilograms, stands nearly 2 meters tall on its rear limbs, and has claws that can tear through the bark of mature trees like it is decorative fabric. The file on Earth predators described brown bears as one of the most powerful land mammals on the continent. She yelled at it, until it left. The bear left. I made a note in my datapad. Do not yell at Petra Voss. The first week passed without significant incident, unless you count the moment during the lab practical when Petra managed to identify 3 separate unknown biological specimens purely by smell before anyone else had even finished setting up their analysis equipment. The lab instructor, a quiet Silurian named Darrow Feen, watched this with an expression I can only describe as professionally disturbed. Humans have a well-documented olfactory system, Darrow said, mostly to himself. We grew up around a lot of things that wanted to eat us, Petra said pleasantly. You learn the smell. Earth has been under your species' dominance for over 10,000 years, Darrow said. Yeah, Petra agreed. We were pretty busy before that. The second week was when things got genuinely complicated. The Academy, in its infinite wisdom, had designed the advanced xenobiology curriculum to include a live specimen handling component. Students were expected to work with real biological organisms, not simulations, not holograms, real living creatures from across the galaxy, including several that were classified as actively dangerous. The crown specimen of the collection was a Gravex stalker. If you are not familiar with a Gravex stalker, consider yourself fortunate. They originate from the third moon of the Kelvari system. They are roughly the size of a large domestic quadruped, with a musculature density that puts them in the top percentile of biological strength for their body mass. They have 6 limbs, 4 of which end in gripping claws capable of exerting enough pressure to crush standard-grade containment plating. They are territorial, highly aggressive, and according to every classification system in the galactic database, completely non-domesticable. The Academy kept one for educational purposes. Its name, according to the care tag on its containment unit, was Brute, which tells you everything you need to know about how the care staff felt about it. The class was brought to the specimen hall in groups of 8. The arrangement was simple. Observe the stalker from behind the safety barrier, take notes, do not make sudden movements, do not make direct eye contact, and under absolutely no circumstances attempt to interact with the specimen directly. These were very clear instructions, posted on 3 separate signs, repeated verbally by Professor Hartan before we entered, printed on the handout. Petra Voss looked at the handout. She folded it neatly and put it in her pocket. Our group was the third to go in. The Gravex stalker was on the far side of the containment space, pacing. It moved with the particular kind of deliberate slowness that means something is not tired, it is calculating. Every few seconds it would stop and look at us with the flat, patient gaze of something that has never once in its entire life had reason to feel afraid. Osik Prale, standing next to me, had gone a color that Volundrians only turn when they are experiencing a stress response. His secondary arms were crossed tightly over his chest. It is bigger than I expected, he said quietly. The file said 412 kilograms, I told him. For this individual specifically. That is very large, Osik said. It is, I agreed. We were making our observations, writing in our notepads, staying very correctly behind the barrier, when one of the other students in our group, a Bruvian named Halleck Spire, who had been making pointed comments about Petra's bear story all week, decided this was the moment to make his feelings known. Your brown bear story, Halleck said, loud enough for the whole group to hear, arms folded in the particular way that signals a Bruvian is either about to fight or about to deliver a speech, was not impressive. That creature behind the barrier outweighs your bear. It has 6 limbs, and I do not think yelling would work on it. Petra was writing something in her notepad. She did not look up. Probably not, she said. So what would you do? Halleck pressed. He had a very self-satisfied expression. The kind that shows up on the face of someone who believes they have just delivered a killing blow in an argument. Against that? With nothing? What would the great human do? Several students were watching now. This was, if I am being honest, the social event of the week. Halleck had been building to this. The whole room knew it. The tension had the very specific texture of something that was about to go either very funny or very badly. Petra finally looked up from her notepad. She looked at Halleck. Then she looked at the Gravex stalker. Then she looked back at Halleck. You want proof? She said. Of what, exactly? Halleck said. That humans can handle something like that, she said. Halleck laughed. It was a short, dismissive sound. I want to see it, yes, because your entire species' reputation in this institution is built on stories and files and second-hand accounts, and none of us have actually seen a human do anything that justifies the fear response the briefing packet apparently wants us to have. Several students shifted uncomfortably, because that was, if you stripped away the aggressive delivery, a point several of them had been quietly thinking, including, if I am being completely honest, me. Petra looked at the Gravax stalker again. It had stopped pacing. It was looking at her. Animals, I have noticed, look at Petra Voss the way they look at things they are not entirely sure how to categorize. Not prey, not threat, something else, something that sits outside the usual binary. Proof, she repeated, like she was tasting the word. Yes, Halleck said. Proof. And Petra Voss set down her notepad, looked at Professor Hartan, and said, I need you to confirm that the stalker's current vaccination and health records are up to date, because I'm going in. The room made a sound. It was not a word. It was just a sound. 19 species represented, and every single one of them made the exact same involuntary noise at the exact same moment. Professor Hartan stared at her. He had been teaching for long enough that very few things surprised him. You could see on his face the specific expression of a being experiencing the extremely rare sensation of genuine surprise. You are not, he said. Article 12 of the Academy's Educational Ethics Code, Petra said, calm as still water, states that students may request voluntary supervised interaction with contained specimens if the student can demonstrate informed consent, adequate preparation, and the supervising faculty member determines the risk is acceptable. I've read the stalker's care file. It's had all its primary vaccinations. Its aggression level today is rated at a 6, not a 9, and I am volunteering. The quiet in that room was so complete I could hear my own second heartbeat. You memorized the ethics code? Darrow Fiend said from the doorway. I read everything when I got here. Petra said simply. It's a new place. You read everything. Professor Hartan looked at the stalker. He looked at Petra. He looked at the stalker again. And here is the thing. Here is the thing nobody talks about when they discuss what happened next. The thing is that Hartan, who has seen more students than any of us will likely ever meet, who has been doing this for longer than some of our species have had space travel, looked at Petra Voss and made a calculation. And the calculation he made was, she is going to be fine. I do not know how he knew. I do not know if it was instinct or experience or something in the way she was standing, but he looked at her, and then he looked at the safety officer on duty, and he said, open the secondary access panel. We are going to observe an unscheduled practical demonstration. Halleck Spire looked for the first time all week like he was regretting something. The access panel opened with a mechanical hiss. Petra Voss rolled up her sleeves. She took exactly 3 seconds to look at the stalker. Not studying it the way a scientist studies a specimen. Looking at it the way something looks at something else when it is deciding what to do next. Then she walked in. The door sealed behind her with a sound like a final decision. Nobody in that room breathed. I am not exaggerating. I have 4 respiratory chambers and all of them locked up at the same time. Ossip Prale had grabbed my upper left arm without realizing he had done it. Halleck Spire, the individual who had demanded this proof in the first place, was standing with his mouth slightly open and an expression that said he had not actually expected anyone to take him seriously. The Gravax stalker turned its full attention to Petra the moment she stepped through. 412 kilograms of territorial predator, 6 limbs, claws that could compress containment plating, and a track record of injuring 2 separate care staff members in the last academic cycle alone. It looked at her the way predators look at things that have entered their space without permission. Not with hunger, exactly, with the cold, flat attention of something that is deciding whether this new variable needs to be removed. Petra did not run. She did not freeze. She did not make herself big and yell, which, given the circumstances, would have been deeply ironic. She stood still, completely still, and she looked at the stalker, not at its claws, not at its posture, at its face. There is a concept in the human behavioral file that I had skimmed past during orientation week without really absorbing. It came back to me very clearly in that moment. The file described a human behavior called threat assessment, and noted that humans, unlike most species, perform this assessment by making and holding direct eye contact with potential threats. It is, the file noted, a behavior that most predator species interpret as a dominant signal. The stalker took 1 step forward, just one. Testing. Petra did not move. The stalker made a sound. It was low, pressurized, the kind of sound that comes from somewhere deep in the chest cavity, and is designed to cause a flight response in anything with functioning auditory nerves. Half the students behind the barrier flinched backward. Darophine made a sound that was technically professional but emotionally was absolutely not. Petra tilted her head slightly to the left. Just slightly. Like she found the sound interesting. The stalker stopped. And here is the part that I have tried to explain to people many times since this day, and have never quite managed to convey accurately, because there are no words in Threxian, the Lundrian, or the standard galactic trade language that fully capture what happened next. The stalker, 412 kilograms of it, looked at Petra Voss and made another sound. Different from the first one. Shorter, less pressurized. The care staff member standing at the observation window, a Mallyrian named Tesk who had been with the specimen for 2 full academic cycles, made a very small, very controlled noise of disbelief. That is a displacement call, Tesk said quietly. Mostly to themselves. It uses that when it interacts with the senior care staff. What does it mean? I asked, because I could not stop myself. It means the animal has decided the other party is not prey, Tesk said. It is a social signal. We have only ever recorded it making that sound toward 4 individuals. All of them had years of experience with this specific specimen. Petra had been in the enclosure for approximately 40 seconds. She took 1 step forward. Slow. No sudden movement. No aggression. Just a step. The kind of step that says I am moving because I choose to, not because you have caused me to. The stalker watched the step happen. It did not retreat, but it did not advance either. It stood its ground with the particular quality of something that is reconsidering its initial evaluation. Then Petra did something that caused Ossik to tighten his grip on my arm so hard I lost partial feeling in my lower left elbow. She crouched down. Not all the way to the floor. Partway. Bringing herself to a lower position, smaller, less imposing, the way you would approach something you wanted to show you were not a threat. And she extended one hand, palm up, fingers loose, in the direction of the stalker. The stalker looked at the hand. Halleck Spire, behind me, made a sound that in Bruvian roughly translates to, I have made a catastrophic error in judgment. The stalker lowered its head. It was a tiny movement, easy to miss if you were not watching closely, but every single one of us was watching with the full and undivided attention of beings who were certain they were about to witness something either magnificent or horrible, and the distinction would only become clear in the next few seconds. It took 1 step toward her outstretched hand, then another, and then it pressed the flat of its primary cranial plate against her palm. The room made the sound again. The same involuntary sound from 19 different species, but different this time, not horror, something else. The specific noise intelligent beings make when reality does something that violates their expectations so completely that their usual categories just stop working. Petra stayed in the crouch. She did not move suddenly. She let her hand stay exactly where it was, and the stalker held its head there for 3 full seconds, which is, according to every behavioral record in the Academy's database, something it has never done with a first contact. Not once, in 4 academic cycles. Then she stood back up, slowly, and the stalker stepped back to give her room. They looked at each other for 1 more moment, and then Petra Voss walked back to the access panel and knocked twice on the inside of the door. It opened. She stepped through. The panel sealed. The stalker, behind the barrier, watched her go. It made the displacement call 1 more time, short, like punctuation. The silence in the observation room was so dense it had texture. Professor Guz Hartan was the first one to speak. He had been teaching for decades. He had seen student demonstrations go wrong in ways that required medical intervention and diplomatic follow-up. He had also, apparently, occasionally seen them go right in ways that rewrote his lecture notes on the spot. That, he said, was a completely unauthorized modification of a standard observation exercise that I will be filing a report about. He paused. It was also the most significant live specimen interaction this facility has recorded in 6 academic cycles. I will also be filing a report about that. Petra was rolling her sleeves back down. She looked completely calm. Not triumphant, not smug, just settled, the way someone looks when they have done a thing they knew they could do, and the only surprise was that anyone thought otherwise. Halleck Spire had not moved. He was still standing with his mouth partially open. He looked, if I am being charitable, like someone who was engaged in very rapid internal recalibration. You want to say something? Petra said to him, not unkindly. Not cruelly either. Just directly. Halleck closed his mouth. He opened it again. He tried twice to form a sentence, and both times something seemed to stop him before the words fully arrived. How? He finally said. How did you know it would not attack? I did not know, she said. You did not know, Ossik repeated. No, she said. I made an educated assessment based on the behavioral data in the care file, the animal's current stress indicators, its body language in the first 10 seconds, and the fact that it had been in captivity long enough to have some social conditioning, and I made a judgment call, She paused. I have made those before. And if the judgment had been wrong? Ossik said. Petra shrugged. It was a human gesture I had been learning to read. This particular version meant something like, that was a real possibility I accepted before walking in. Then it would have been wrong, she said, but it was not. Darrow Fiend, the lab instructor, had produced a datapad and was furiously taking notes. Can I ask, he said with the tone of a scientist who has found something they cannot immediately classify and is trying very hard not to show how excited they are, what you observed in the animal's body language that informed your assessment. The positioning of the tertiary limbs, she said immediately. When predators are in a genuine attack state, they pull the secondary limbs back and brace the tertiary ones forward for impact. Its tertiary limbs were loose. It was threatening, not attacking. There is a difference. Also, the jaw tension was lower than a full aggression state, and it blinked twice in the first 30 seconds, which in most bilateral predators signals a reduction in active threat focus. Darrow was writing very fast. Also, she added, it smelled like it had been fed recently. Well-fed animals are less likely to view an unknown entity as food. You identified that from across the barrier? Darrow said. I got here early and stood near the ventilation output for about 10 minutes before you all arrived, she said, as though this were a completely normal thing to do. It was not a completely normal thing to do. The session ended 30 minutes later. Professor Harton dismissed us with the very specific manner of someone who needs to go sit somewhere quiet and update several documents. The students filed out into the corridor in small clusters, talking in low, rapid voices. The kind of talking that happens after something unexpected reshapes the way everyone in a room has been thinking about something. I walked beside Petra. I had not planned to. My legs simply went that direction. Can I ask you something? I said. Sure, she said. In the briefing file for humans, I said, it describes your species as having developed under significant predator pressure, high competition, dangerous environment. And it says this created a set of behavioral adaptations that are, and I am quoting directly, difficult to fully categorize. Yeah, she said. I have been trying to understand what that means in practical terms, I said, since orientation, and I think today was the first time I actually saw it. She looked at me sideways. What did you see? You were not fearless, I said slowly, working it out as I spoke. You were afraid. I could see it in your physical indicators. Elevated respiration, slight tension across the shoulder structure. But you did not let the fear run the decision. You used the fear to sharpen the assessment. And then you acted anyway. Petra was quiet for a moment. That is, she said, actually a really accurate description. It is not something most species do, I said. Most species. When the fear response is triggered, the behavior follows the fear. Retreat, freeze, aggressive displacement. The fear and the action match. And with humans they do not always match, she said. With you they clearly do not, I said. She thought about that for a few steps. My grandmother used to say that courage is not the absence of fear. It is deciding that something matters more than the fear does. She paused. She was a very small woman. She was also the most terrifying person I have ever met. More terrifying than the brown bear, I said. Petra smiled. It was the first time I had seen her smile, and I want to note for the record that it was not a comfortable smile to receive. It was warm, yes, but it was also the smile of something that has a great deal of confidence in itself and finds the world reliably interesting. The bear, she said, at least made sense. We walked the rest of the way to the main hall in a companionable silence that I had not expected to develop this quickly. Behind us I could hear Halleck Spire talking to Ossik Prowley in the low, fast tones of someone extensively revising a previously held position. Over the following weeks, the story of what happened in the specimen hall traveled the way stories travel in closed academic environments, which is to say, everywhere, quickly, with increasing elaboration. By the third retelling I heard, Petra had apparently arm-wrestled the stalker into submission. By the fifth, she had been attacked and had simply absorbed the impact. Neither was accurate. The accurate version was, if anything, more unsettling than the embellishments, because the embellishments at least followed a logic that made sense. Strength beats strength. The real version required understanding something about humans that did not fit neatly into existing categories. She had walked into a room with a 400-kilogram predator, looked it in the eye and been calm enough, steady enough, quiet enough that the predator had decided, on reflection, that she was something it should listen to. That was not a strength you could measure in kilograms or claw pressure ratings. It was something else. Something that the 32-page briefing file had been gesturing at without quite naming. Something that lived in the specific intersection of intelligence and endurance, and the willingness to stand completely still when every instinct is screaming that running is the sensible option. I sat with that thought for a long time. Halleck Spire, for what it is worth, did not make any more pointed comments about human credibility after that day. He was not sullen about it. He was not resentful. He was, I think, genuinely recalibrating. He had asked for proof. He had received it. He was a Bruvian, and Bruvians, whatever their other qualities, are generally honest enough to update their views when reality requires it. About 2 weeks after the specimen hall incident, I arrived early to the lab and found Petra already there, sitting on the bench outside the door, drinking something hot from a sealed container and reading another physical paper book. She had, I had noticed, a large collection of them, always different ones, always paper. "Do you ever use a data pad?" I said. "For notes," she said. "Not for reading." "Why not?" She looked at the book in her hands. "My father gave me my first book when I was 4 years old, said there was something about holding the weight of a story in your hands that a screen cannot give you." She paused. He was right. I sat down on the bench a reasonable distance away and looked out at the courtyard. The academy campus in the early morning had a specific quality of stillness that I had come to appreciate. Before the day started, before the assignments, and the assessments, and the careful navigation of 37 other students from 19 different species, all of whom were smart and driven, and occasionally difficult. "Can I ask you something else?" I said. "You are going to, anyway," she said, not unkindly. "Why are you here?" I said. "At the academy specifically." Not the general answer, the real one. She was quiet for longer than I expected, long enough that I thought she might not answer. "There are 17 species in this institution," she said finally, "that have documented histories of contact with Earth, ranging from observation to attempted interference to, in 3 cases, something that the diplomatic file classifies as a hostile encounter." She looked at her book. "Humans have been watched by the galaxy for a long time, and for most of that time nobody asked us what we thought about it. We were a specimen, a curiosity, a file." She closed the book. "I am here because I want to understand the galaxy the way the galaxy has been understanding us, from the inside, directly, not from a file." I thought about that, and if the galaxy is not entirely ready for that, I said, "then it will get ready," she said simply. "That is generally how it goes." She opened her book again. The morning light came through the courtyard in long, flat angles, and somewhere in the facility behind us, in a containment space on the east wing of the specimen hall, a Gravax stalker was beginning its day. According to Tesk, the care staff member who had been with the animal for 2 cycles, it had started making the displacement call during its morning check-in. The one it only made for individuals it had categorized as something other than a threat. It had been making it every morning since the incident. Tesk found this very interesting from a scientific standpoint, and had submitted 3 preliminary research notes about it to the faculty board. I found it interesting for a completely different reason. Because that call, that short pressurized sound that meant "I have decided you belong in a different category," was the closest thing to a formal acknowledgement I had seen from any living being in this building so far. Not a file note. Not a briefing packet. Not a species rating on a threat assessment scale. An actual response, from one creature to another. Petra Voss turned a page. I thought, the galaxy asked for proof. It got it. And now, whether it was ready or not, it was going to have to figure out what to do with the answer.
Would you have believed her before she walked in? Let me know. Will you like and subscribe for more stories like this? See you in the next one.